BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And later on in the program, I will once again be joined by Nicole Legg. She is the co-host of the D.B. Cooper book review, and we'll be talking about all things Cooper. In addition to that, I will also be exploring the Cooper sections in the book Anthrax to Zodiac by Denise Diana Huddle, and continuing with the Cooper Profile, where we examine the writings of Dr. David G. Hubbard and his book The Skyjacker. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Now, some of you may have seen this graphic going by on Zodiac Monday, when I've shared the book cover for Anthrax to Zodiac by Denise Diana Huddle, and it's a book that I looked at briefly in 2024 when it came out. Prior to Cooper Friday, I used to do a segment called the Anything Goes Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, where any subject was fair game. And there was a free chapter of her book that was put out, and I did an episode called The Anthrax Killer and the Zodiac Killer, and that was mostly a comparison between her observations of the Anthrax Killer and the Zodiac, because there are some similarities, particularly in the writing of the letters. And of course, every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer, so I was quite curious. But I finally looked at her D.B. Cooper material right now, and that's what we're going to respond to. But as I said, I do the Zodiac Monday segment, and if you're curious about the Zodiac Killer mystery, I would like to let you know that today's episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and the author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If the Zodiac case fascinates you, be sure to check out the Zodiac Revisited. It's a deep dive into the mystery with a unique and interesting perspective. The trilogy is available on Amazon, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite true crime books. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping out Michael by leaving a 5-star review. Once again, that's the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. But as far as Denise Diana Huddle's observations go, I think that there is something that is very interesting about how people look at D.B. Cooper when they begin the investigation, because on Cooper Friday, I've also talked to you guys about Simon Whistler and his D.B. Cooper videos, as well as Pat Brown recently, the criminal profiler. And as they were absolute newcomers to the D.B. Cooper case, and there's a big difference between Simon Whistler and Pat Brown compared to Denise Diana Huddle, because she wrote a substantial section in her book about D.B. Cooper, whereas they just made some stuff for a YouTube video, or videos plural. Not to put down their work or anything, but it's definitely less extensive. But what's the commonality? When people begin this observation, all three of the people that I just mentioned seem to think that D.B. Cooper was somebody who didn't necessarily have a strong military background. Instead, he was somebody who had connections to the aerospace sector, particularly Boeing. And this is some interesting stuff, because D.B. Cooper committed the skyjacking. He went from Portland to Seattle. He handed a note to the flight attendant, Florence Schaffner. He said he had a bomb in the briefcase, took everybody on the plane hostage, and then when the plane lands in Seattle, he gets his $200,000 ransom and 4 parachutes. He wants to go to Mexico, but they say that Mexico is too far for the fuel capacity, so they have to land in Reno. But Cooper doesn't need that long. He jumps out and parachutes into the night, somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen or heard from again. And when he is doing this, some people immediately look at this and they think, yeah, this guy is ex-military. Mike Davis perhaps said it the best. This guy chose to jump at night, and civilians don't really train or prepare for jumps at night. For example, when civilians go skydiving, if you just see any video of a civilian skydiving, it is usually during the daytime. And I mostly agree with that. But the people that I've listed off, including Diana Huddle, Denise Diana Huddle, are really zoning in on some other clues, and that could be that D.B. Cooper worked in the aerospace sector, and D.B. Cooper could have worked at Boeing. I mean, there's even this one sentence in the book Anthrax to Zodiac in the Cooper section where it says, "There is the rise and fall of the Boeing empire." And what this is talking about is that when D.B. Cooper was on the plane, he didn't say that he had a grudge against the airline Northwest Orient. He said that he had a grudge. Could the grudge be against the company Boeing? Did he want to skyjack a Boeing 727 because he had a problem with Boeing as opposed to any other issue? Was it just about saying a giant F you to Boeing? And there's some rationale that's laid out here. Firstly, as a private investigator, Denise Huddle has done some work on this, and she points out that the United States was falling behind in the aviation game. In the 1960s, things might have actually been going well, but by her own mission and her own words, we had the sexy 60s and the sagging 70s. Other countries were ahead of the United States in the aerospace game, such as the British, the French, and the Soviet Union, with particular regard to the development of supersonic travel. And because the United States is lagging or just slipping behind, that also included Boeing. And there was actually one point where Boeing was going to be facing bankruptcy, and even to the point where they had to make a decision: are they going to lay off a large amount of employees, or are they going to actually try and, go closer down the road toward bankruptcy? And they went with the layoffs. And there was just a massive upsurge in unemployment in the Seattle area, as well as other surrounding places, because she also points out that Boeing had a plant in Everett, Washington. So, I mean, it's not exactly stated clearly in the book, but it's almost insinuated that is she saying that D.B. Cooper could have been somebody who worked with Boeing in the Seattle area, and that's why the Portland to Seattle flight was chosen for D.B. Cooper. Possibly, possibly. But let's continue with some of these things in regards to the Boeing and aerospace connections. Following up with this, D.B. Cooper was on the plane, and he demonstrated some very advanced knowledge of the Boeing 727. And there's even a quotation that Denise Diana Huddle found when it says that it was not an accident that D.B. Cooper skyjacked a Boeing 727, because it had the rear aft staircase, and that was what he could have used to go down and jump out. Because if he had jumped out from a side staircase, then there was a chance of something involving a wing could go wrong, but more importantly, the plane engine. More importantly, the plane engine would be his biggest threat. But by going down the back aft staircase, that would be something that has a little bit more security. Cooper also knew numerous things about the Boeing 727. He knew where the oxygen tanks were. He also made multiple specifications about how he wanted the plane to fly. I think it's pretty common knowledge that D.B. Cooper understood certain things about the Boeing 727, but not all. But is this some guy who was perhaps laid off from Boeing, very frustrated at Boeing, and he wanted to create this set of tactics and plans to put in place to get money because he felt that he was owed it for some particular reasons. And we're going to talk about that a lot in the Skyjacker section. Now, overall, though, I mean, these are some very interesting observations. I don't think that it necessarily overrides the claims that people have made about D.B. Cooper and his military career. If I had to make a determination right now, I would expect that D.B. Cooper was indeed in the military in the past and he had some type of military aviation background. I'm really undecided on whether or not he worked for Boeing, because one thing that I've learned in my true crime journey is the most obvious answer isn't always the right one, or the first thing that comes to you isn't necessarily the correct answer. Oh, well, there are lots of Boeing layoffs and Cooper's talking a lot about the Boeing 727 and he knows a lot about their features. Therefore, he was a Boeing employee. No, not at all. I mean, that doesn't immediately signify to me that Cooper was a Boeing employee. He could have learned about it in other ways. He could have had a relative who was a Boeing employee. He could have been indirectly affected by the layoffs, without working for Boeing himself. He could have been somebody who was just very, very familiar with aviation because he was an aviation buff. He could have taken his aviation knowledge from the military, being an ex-pilot or paratrooper, and continued that into civilian life, always reading about airplanes. There are so many possibilities. So when people just zone in on these things, I know what they're trying to do. They're looking for clues and they're following a trail of evidence. But this is why the D.B. Cooper case remains unsolved. How do we know that that's the exact trail of evidence to follow? And I mean, I guess I'm trying to say is I am not convinced at all that Cooper worked at Boeing. And I know it's boring to hear that someone's saying 50-50 on something, but that's where I honestly stand about Boeing. Now, if you're going to say that Cooper worked with something related to airplanes in his life, we're going to say 99%. Something related to airplanes and aviation, 99%. I think that Cooper had some type of connection to that in the past, not just reading books and magazines. We're talking about working with airplanes, aviation, paratrooping, something to that effect. So I want to make this very clear. I'm not 50-50 on every single issue, but I would love to know what you guys think about this. Do you think that D.B. Cooper worked for Boeing? And are you going to go down the pathway like some of the other people like Simon Whistler and Pat Brown that I mentioned, when they're going to say, no, I'm not really seeing any military background. I think that this was an aerospace guy, some type of aeronautical engineer, some type of individual who worked for a company like Boeing. Now, do you go to that extremes? Are you going to be a little bit 50-50 on Boeing like me? Or are you going to say that, no, I don't really see anything from the aerospace sector. Instead, I think that Cooper learned about this because he just knew a lot about airplanes and he had a military background. Where do you stand on the Boeing issue? I would love to know what you think. Please put your ideas in the comment section down below. One more time, for larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. Now, if you do read this book, Anthrax to Zodiac, there are some things in it that might bother you. They bothered me. And there are these attempts at humor that have been created by the writer. And it's like when someone is doing something very seriously and just out of the blue, they just try to say something that is either funny or outrageous or just a little bit rough-edged. And I actually just had some very adverse reactions to that stuff. Maybe I'm just a little bit stale, but I was reading through this book and it talks about how D.B. Cooper is sitting on the plane and he hands a note to the flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, and Denise Huddle writes in the book that in the 1970s, female flight attendants were the equivalent of clickbait, and a female flight attendant such as Florence Schaffner would be hit on more than the basketball backboard at the NBA Finals. And when I'm reading that stuff, I'm just thinking, wow, I totally see your point. If you were trying to be funny, I don't find that funny at all. It's almost as if you're just talking about Cooper and you just threw in a really, really flat joke. Another person who does this a lot is Dr. Todd Grande, who has a D.B. Cooper video out there. But he also talks about countless other cases, and I really just found that he would often be very deadpan, and then just throw some type of intentionally humorous curveball at the audience, but I never connected with it. Maybe that's just me, but there are these moments from time to time in the book, Anthrax to Zodiac by Denise Diana Huddle, that will create that type of experience for you. And now I'm going to welcome Nicole Legg back to the program. She is the co-host of the D.B. Cooper book review on the Cooper Vortex, along with Darren Schaefer. And last week on the channel, we did part 1 of the interview, where we were talking about really her observations about the Cooper case in relation to the books that have been published and some of the mainstream literature that is out there. In this part of the interview, we're going to talk about some of the more basic facts of the Cooper case, as well as some interpretations of the evidence, and what Nicole thinks about all of them and how they will lead us to finding D.B. Cooper. So I hope you'll enjoy the interview with Nicole Legg. And once again, if there are any ideas that you guys have for future episodes of Black Box Online Radio's Cooper Friday, please put them in the comments section down below. And please stick around until the end so we can talk about the Skyjacker, and we'll do the Cooper Profile segment, which is all about the psychological profiling of these airplane hijackers. So without further ado, let's welcome Nicole Legg back to the show. And Nicole, there really is something I have to ask you about. I can see that you have a copy of The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard, and that is one book that I talk about very frequently on Black Box Online Radio. And have you read through that and explored that type of material?
Not yet.
Well.
I've read a couple non-D.B. Cooper books. And I've gone back to reading two books at once. So I'm currently reading Chaos, and then I believe it's called And the Mountain Cried. Now that is a D.B. Cooper book, loosely D.B. Cooper book, but I haven't gotten to Skyjacker yet. I have a whole stack behind me that I need to get to. But I am interested to see what it has to say about the hijackers and stuff. Have you read it though, right?
I wish people could see my copy of it. Have I read it? I'm working on it because I'm going through that one with a fine-tooth comb. We're talking about like one chapter every week. And this is one of the few times, in fact, this is the only time in recent memory that I've taken a book for BBOR, brought out the highlighter, and just kind of like folding back pages, making notes. And I'm really hoping to do something at the end of the year where I make a big presentation on that one. And if you finish the Skyjacker, let's keep in touch because I would love to do some type of interactive thing with other people.
Yeah.
Because that's all about the psychological profiling of skyjacking. But because we're talking about D.B. Cooper, I want to throw some of those observations at you that were made by Dr. Hubbard. And you can tell me, what do you think about this? Do you agree, disagree, right track, wrong track? Ready?
Yes.
Dr. Hubbard has interviewed multiple people, at least 20 people for the book who were skyjackers, like mostly the guys who tried to do things with Cuba and that were caught in the act. And a lot of them had very, very problematic sexual relationships, and that there's this type of sexual dysfunction that's going on. So they committed a skyjacking as a way to boost their own type of ego or male vitality and self-image. Do you think D.B. Cooper would have been a guy like that?
No, I don't think so. I feel like the Cooper, Cini, and probably all of the Cooper copycats were more PTSD, and the mental illnesses related to all of those things. I think that was what drove him and most of all of the copycats. And have you read the article about Cini? That one article, I think Ryan posted it maybe on the group about Cini and his life. Have you read that one?
Yes, I have, but unfortunately, I read that one after I did my episode, and then Ryan sent it to me privately. He's like, hey, you got to read this Paul Cini article.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think a lot of these were more PTSD and some mental illness going on, and not so much needing to prove your manhood. What do you think?
Well, of course, I found so many commonalities in the Skyjacker where there are just so many case studies, and this is one commonality among most people. But giving a shout out to YouTube user John Blues in the comment section who said, now, wait a second, all this talk about sexual dysfunction and need to prove your manhood, what about somebody like Richard McCoy, who is married with children, and his wife doesn't necessarily come across as someone who is demeaning him in any way. I wasn't there, I don't necessarily know, but all the aspects of their marriage, I haven't heard any stories about that. This, again, is exactly what you said. Some ex-military guy who was on hard times and resorted to the skyjacking. So I can see both sides of the story, and again, that's not an exciting answer. But I do have maybe sort of a better question, and that is that do you think that D.B. Cooper was more of a psychopath, or was he someone who just wanted the money?
I think he probably just wanted the money. I think he was just a criminal. And I think the calmness and stuff just came with being comfortable with crime, and comfortable with himself. So I don't think he was a psychopath. My mind could be changed on that, but right now with what I have, I don't think so. How about you?
Before 3 weeks ago, I never would have thought of Cooper as a psychopath. I was just watching some videos. One came up from Dr. Todd Grande, and he was talking about how Cooper showed almost no regard for the people on the plane, in regards to the threats. With the threat
Right.
saying, I will kill all of you if I don't get what I want. Okay, that might be a psychopathic tendency, but absolutely, I can't say that Cooper was a clinical psychopath. Maybe the serial killers that I talk about on BBOR were clinical psychopaths. As of now,
Right.
all we know is that Cooper wanted the money. He never actually killed anyone on the plane, right? And we don't even
Right.
know if the bomb was real, if he had the capabilities to kill anyone on the plane. We don't even know if Cooper had a backup handgun or something like that. Some people, have their observations,
Mm-hmm.
their rationale on why he absolutely would have had a handgun. I'm not even convinced that Cooper could have killed anyone aside from hand-to-hand combat or something similar. So
Yeah.
it's definitely some interesting stuff to consider. Maybe he has some psychopathic tendencies to commit the skyjacking. You have to be a little bit out there. But overall, I'd have to say no. And this is one of the things, though, about podcasts and talk radio is we don't always have the perfect soundbite answer. Sometimes you really have to
No.
draw these things out. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have another question in a completely different direction for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had Eric Eulis on the program, and his whole statement is, if you cannot explain the tie, he's not the guy. Because D.B. Cooper left behind his clip-on tie with the mother of pearl tie clip, and it had all of these rare metallic elements that were found on the tie. Now,
Right.
Eric Eulis seems to think that the tie is the pathway to D.B. Cooper, and I disagree with this. So I want to know what you think. And, feel free to be as honest as you want.
The tie is very interesting. Again, science. It's got all. I love all the science. But as far as finding Cooper, if the tie had had a better chain of custody, that's what worries me. Who touched the tie? What did they have on their hands? Did they have gloves on? You've got to think of all these things. So how much is it on the tie that's actually from Cooper? How much is it from people that handled it? So I think we might find some information. I'm not totally going to dismiss the tie, because I think if we can weed out the things that aren't relevant, and I think it's important to not cherry pick different things, but find the correlation between certain things, and then you can be like, oh, okay, well, that is definitely this, so that's not something, that might, that could be contamination. So I think the tie has a use, but I don't know 100% if it will help us find Cooper. I hate it. The tie is a love-hate relationship, because it's been so many places, and you just don't know what's touched it. So I don't know what I can't wait to see when people kind of dive into the new analysis and see what they find on it. And maybe that can kind of help figure a couple of things out. So I hate to say it because I say it a lot. I guess I'm 50-50
But
on
that's
the
totally
tie.
fine.
I hate it. I don't think it's the answer 100%, but I don't think it's 100% worthless. We might be able to get something out of it. What do you think? You don't like? You're not a big tie person.
No, I'm not, but I think it's totally fine to be 50-50 on it. And this is one that I can perhaps explain a little bit more easily. What I've said is that we don't have enough information about the tie. So it's not that I discount it and say it's worthless. It's not that I say that it's the pathway to Cooper. I'm saying put it on the back burner, put it back in the cabinet, and once we know more, then we can use the tie in a different way. Because, say, for example, one suspect we haven't talked about is L.D. Cooper, Lindoyle
Yeah.
Cooper. And in that whole theory, as I understand, these rare metallic elements that would have been found on the tie would have either come from his brother, or maybe L.D. went to his brother's workplace, but his brother is the one who would have had more chances to be exposed to the elements. So that means that he could have borrowed the tie, he could have been at somebody else's workplace. He could have interacted with someone who contaminated the tie. And I know that those might sound a little bit unlikely, but we shouldn't discredit possibilities like that. So I'm just on the stance of we don't have enough information about it to use it as our type of holy grail or holy road to Cooper. And
Right.
that's not the most fashionable thing to say, and it's also not the most optimistic one either, but I'm just being honest at that point.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that could help, but I think it needs it needs some deciphering first to figure out what's useful on the tie. But yeah, I think it's kind of a side project, but I do love the science of it. I think that is very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
If
I
you
don't
want to
think
talk,
it's going to lead us. I don't think you have to be tied to the tie to be an only suspect for Cooper at all.
I'm borrowing that from you, by the way. You don't have to be tied to the tie from now on. That's pretty good.
Great.
But if you want to talk about science, one thing we have not discussed yet is Tina Bar. In 1980, of course, $6,000 was found at Tina Bar, and it was from the Cooper skyjacking, 9 years after the hijacking took place. Nicole, how did it get there?
Oh gosh, that's the $200,000 question. I wish we all knew, right? But that's the science that I do love about it. I feel like we have all of the pieces to this equation. I feel like it's definitely not a linear equation. It's probably more like, what was the Poincaré conjecture, right? That was that $1 million equation that it took them 100 years to solve.
I don't know.
It's more like that.
You're asking the wrong guy math questions. You should see me even trying to count. Let's see, 1965 to 1971. How many years was that? I don't know. No, you're asking the wrong guy math questions. But
Yeah.
you must have some theory about how the money got to Tina Bar, or not even a theory, but possibilities. Your thought process. Even I had one before Cooper Friday started, so I would love to know what you think.
So I have theories. I have theories that can get me halfway and then I lose them. So I love the fact of it falling into a sandpit under the flight path. I love that. And then ending up on the Fazio's property through some dealings. The fact that they were stacked is really hard to go against that someone put them there. That would have to be a very delicate movement of sand if it was a sand pit. So that's where my sand pit falls apart. I've got lots of diatom questions. I'm excited that there's a hydrologist going to be at CooperCon this year. So I've got so many diatom questions that I need answered to try to figure out how it got in the water. But I don't have a single theory, but I do love the science of it all and reading up on everything. Tina Bar is probably one of my favorite parts of the case because it's actual Cooper money that we know was Cooper's. It didn't really get passed through so many hands in the beginning. So I like Tina Bar, but I don't have a concrete theory. It's going to change as the day changes. But I do spend tons of time thinking about Tina Bar and diatoms.
No.
What about you? What is your theory?
Oh, if you're going to ask me, I had a big reversal. Before starting Cooper Friday, I would have definitely told you that it got there by natural causes. When I was listening to these, D.B. Cooper videos made by such and such YouTuber who were not closely following the case, they just make a one-off video. They say it had to have been planted there by human hands. And I was just thinking, no, wait a second. No, there could be an easier explanation for how the money got there. We just haven't found it yet. But once I started Cooper Friday and I began closely looking at the case, I had a reversal. And I was like, now I do think that it was planted there by a human intervention. And Hercules doesn't like the word planted. Let's say it was placed there by
Yeah.
by some person because, as you said, the way that the bills were stacked, slightly off center, and that it is just it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for it to have fallen out of the sky and landed there because the psychological profiler Pat Brown said that she thought that Cooper walked down the aft staircase before the jump, and the three bundles fell out of his bag, bounced off the aft staircase, and then they landed at Tina Bar. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa! Assumptions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I mean, like, I don't think that's what happened at all. What do you think about that?
Absolutely not. It was nowhere near the flight path.
Right.
And for those bundles to stay so neatly together
For 9
10,000
years.
feet for right? Flying over to there? No. And that's what's frustrating too, is when you have someone looking into the case but has the facts wrong. So it's hard to kind of go on whatever they have to say. Because you're like, well, you didn't really research the case that much before you started breaking the case apart. So I have a hard time with that. What do you think about that, though?
Well, I certainly don't think that the three bundles bounced off the half staircase for all the reasons that you listed off. I mean, wrong location, and they should have been blown apart into the blast, right, and gone into all different directions. We were talking about scattered bills in the sky, maybe. Maybe. I mean, but I would also just really like to know, though, what do you think about some of these observations from Pat Brown's psychological profile on Cooper? And I'm going to list everything off, and then you can tell me what's right and what's wrong, okay?
Okay.
All right, number one, D.B. Cooper was not in the military. Number two, D.B. Cooper had no criminal background. Number three, D.B. Cooper was Canadian. D.B. Cooper crossed the Canadian border, and he wanted to cross the border again. That's why he went to Portland. He wanted to fly to Seattle, then fly southbound, then jump out of the plane relatively close to Seattle because his getaway strategy is to cross into Canada. And then the next one, D.B. Cooper was Caucasian, but he also had Canadian heritage, First Nation, or like what she was calling Native Canadian heritage. And I just have to throw in one thing. At first, I thought she might have been completely off point with some of these things, but then I could see the rationale a little bit. I thought she was just kind of pulling stuff out of thin air, but I began to think, wait a second, she might be onto something. What do you think about any of those?
I disagree with him not being a criminal. And I think McCoy proves that. I'm not going to think about going to hijack an airplane. Are you? I think he definitely was a criminal. And I definitely think he had some kind of military experience for that age. I think pretty much every man had some kind of military experience for that time period. I like a Canadian Cooper. I've warmed up to that idea, and mainly because a negotiable American currency.
Yes.
Instead of saying like dollars, because you have Canadian dollars and USD. So I do like a Canadian Cooper, and I don't mind a native. Like almost a Native American.
But one thing that Ryan has done to his credit is really talked about how the copycats had aviation backgrounds in the military. And we even have McCoy, right? Ex-military and so on. So I don't think that it's beyond belief that Cooper was in the military. The thing that I started to give her credit for was Cooper crosses the Canadian border, and he wants to return to Canada. But if he were to take the flight from Seattle to Portland and then back, that'd be too obvious. No, you want to go from Portland to Seattle, then jump relatively close to the takeoff point, relatively, and then move back to Canada. I saw the rationale there, but Cooper could have been from Florida or something and set this whole thing up. I don't know if that's a perfect thing. And I would like to actually ask you something, though. Why do you think Cooper jumped when he did? Do you think that he knew what he was doing, or is he just like, whatever? What do you think happened?
that's another thing. It changes the further I'm into the case. I do think he knew what he was doing. I do think he could see the lights of Portland. And it is where he started. So I think it makes more sense to jump where you started because you got there somehow. Maybe you left a car there so I do think he meant to jump where he did. What about you? What do you think these days?
I mean, I would definitely think that he knew exactly where he was going. I think he jumped when he wanted to. I think that he could have easily estimated the time. If he wanted to jump closer to Reno, jump closer to Reno. If he wanted to go to Mexico, jump over Mexico, because we have Heinemann going to Honduras. So just refuel in Reno and have the plane fly to Mexico. No, Cooper jumped where he wanted to because I think he had a very, very clear idea. Now, the things that people in the comments section try to convince me on is that no, Cooper wanted to go to Portland. He didn't want to cross the Canadian border. He started in Portland. He's making a round trip to Portland. And that's why he jumped when he did. You brought up seeing the city lights of Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I can follow that type of thinking. Yet he had his getaway vehicle or his preparations are all situated in Oregon. And I mean, that's one of those things why it's an unsolved case. It's almost like different interpretations of the evidence make equal sense.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Jeffries parachute, which would make sense, if he had a car and he, obviously meant to jump close to Portland. The Jeffries parachute is found right there. So I think you can put together a story. It's just proving a story.
All right, though, so we've gone over the money at Tina Bar, we've gone over Cooper's destination, and we've talked about the tie. But I suppose that there are a couple aspects of the case that we haven't discussed. And to use Darren Schaefer's favorite question, what do you think about the bomb? Was the bomb real?
Oh, I think it was.
And why is that?
Today I think it was. I think he needed an out. Like, I know you're not a huge person on, him carrying a gun and stuff, but I definitely think I really like the idea of him having a handgun as a second means. And a bomb's, I mean, he said you weren't going to take him alive. So I do think it was real. Tina, I think, wasn't her father an electrician? And she saw it. So I think maybe she would have been able to tell if it were fake. It was definitely possible of, the way that it was wired up. It definitely could have been a live bomb. So I currently think it was real.
Okay, very good. And the next one would be, do you think D.B. Cooper had an accomplice?
Ooh, if he did, it was Johnston. I don't know, because loose lips sink ships. So that's why Johnston is a great one, because I think he only lives until May of 72, which is spring, which ties back to spring die times. And then your Cooper mind goes like, could there be, a coincidence?
Would you like to tell us more about him?
I don't, all I know is from Ryan's video. He was caught passing lots of 20s in, I think, Astoria, Oregon. A couple of the 20s had very similar serial numbers to the Cooper 20s. And I think one of his previous charges was, oh gosh, the word just totally slipped out of my mind. Counterfeit.
Counterfeit, sure.
So, I think he's definitely a good suspect. You've got someone with these maps. He has a criminal history. He's definitely not a great guy at all, if you've seen his rap sheet. I think it lines up perfectly. So if there was an accomplice, I think it could only be Johnston. But otherwise, I think none of the other ones really had an accomplice besides McCoy. And like you had said earlier, had they changed just a few different things, they could have gotten away with it. Well, Mac had an accomplice, but that was part of the downfall. Obviously, when you have too many people involved, it's too many people that could tell.
Well, one thing I've noticed, though, with the psychological profilers, like not only Pat Brown, but also Todd Grande, whom I mentioned previously, is they say that Cooper's all about himself on the plane. He certainly doesn't make it seem like there's anyone else involved. He's drawing all the attention to himself, and he's the one with the bomb. He's the one with the plan, and he doesn't give away any clues that an accomplice wasn't involved. What do you think about that?
I think that is true, and that could even work with Johnston because he was the only one, because I think Johnston was sitting in jail. So I guess he was kind of like, well, it's just me now.
I mean...
So I guess it can kind of work with that. But, that is a good point. He only talks about himself. But, I don't know a whole lot in the criminal profiling about that. So I could see where she's coming from. But to play devil's advocate, I could also think, well, he probably does feel that way because his help got arrested.
But also, when we look at McCoy, though, he was married. And it seems like his wife knew quite a bit about what's going on. And Cooper, I think, could have easily been married, and his wife could have known something. That's one of the biggest things that I just do not necessarily understand. Was Cooper married? Was he divorced? And... I mean, it's so easy to speculate. And, once you read The Skyjacker, you'll see all of the speculative reasons for marriage and against, but it's just, I don't really know, to be honest.
Me either. It could be either way. I lean more towards he wasn't married, maybe had been in the past, but kind of lean more towards that he was either divorced, widowed, or just single is kind of where I lead.
Well, if that's the case, though, then we have the $6,000 that was found. The rest of the money was never located. What do you think happened to it?
I think he spent it. Bill Grinnell was at CooperCon 2 years ago. And, they talked about that. And, not too long after the hijacking, they stopped looking for those serial numbers. So I think it could have been easily spent. I know what Arthur Friedberg said that, that wasn't really possible. And I'd have to listen to that podcast again because he talks something about, when you notice if, a large amount of 20s suddenly went into circulation. But I do question, and that's why I need to listen to it again, because my thought is, but these 20s were technically already in circulation. It's not like they counterfeited or, printed, $200,000 in 20s all of a sudden, and all of a sudden they were in circulation. So I need to read it again, or listen to it again. But I think the money got spent. How about you?
In the past, I would have said absolutely not. And thank you to the wonderful listeners of Cooper Friday, as well as all of the people who make Cooper content on YouTube. But really, just people in the comment section were trying to bring it to my attention that, yes, the money could have been spent, and they didn't have electronic devices scanning for the money in 1971, 72, and 73, and Cooper could have waited a while, spent the money, and Cooper could have also done certain things to change the money very easily into things like whether it's Vegas casino chips or crossing the border of another country and exchanging it. Now, I don't know if there's any evidence to suggest that those possibilities are what happened. That's just like conjecture. But what they pointed out was that they weren't looking for the money as closely as people thought. And, I've had Brandon Arnold on the program, and he just pretty much said he thought Cooper just spent the money regularly in the 1970s buying ordinary objects. And no one was really looking for it. Now it's out of circulation, perhaps. Mostly.
Yeah.
So,
I agree. I think it got spent. And, I don't think it was anything flashy.
But you must know that when you watch, resources that have been made for the general public. They're like, the serial numbers never appeared in circulation. Oh my goodness. But they try to use that as evidence that Cooper died during the jump. And I don't think Cooper died. What about you?
I definitely don't think he died.
Of course not.
Maybe injured an ankle or a leg, but definitely those parachutes. I mean, read Andrade's book. Those parachutes were, I mean, there was what, a 0.001% chance of not surviving a jump with one of them. They were made for survival. So I 100% think he survived.
Now, if you're going to say that, though, I have to ask a follow-up question. What do you think Cooper's jumping abilities would have been? And we're going to use the scale of Braden to Vordal. Milton Vordal being really smart but zero jumping. Ted Braden being one of the best skydivers in the world, where people would have been afraid to jump next to him because, oh, he's so good, I'm going to look bad. Where do you think Cooper would fit into that? How much jumping experience did he have?
Well, he knew about a packing card. And so I think that if, and I'm not sure how the military was then. Do you, are you a trained pilot and then they're like, here's your parachute if you need it, just put it on and pull? Or were you taught about the parachute? So because he knew where a packing card was, I feel like he's maybe a couple steps below Braden. Braden's perfect for this, but because of the packing card knowledge, that kind of takes everything else off the table of him not knowing about parachutes. So definitely more towards Braden.
Wow, that is fascinating. And Nicole, I'm going to give you the floor in just a second and ask if you have any final send-off for the listeners of Black Box Online Radio and Cooper Friday. And also, in the future, once you go through the Skyjacker, if you want to do an episode on that one or some type of discussion, I told you I'm slowly working through it and planning something big for the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, really, just the floor is going to be yours. And any new upcoming episodes of the Cooper Book Review and anything else you'd like to promote, I'll give it to you.
No more episodes of the Cooper Book Review. We don't have any planned. I think we probably both needed a little bit of a break. It was pretty quick. Lots of reading, but I loved it, and I would be more than happy to do any more of them. But we've not recorded any other ones. But that's kind of it. I'm excited to see everyone at CooperCon this year. I can't wait. I've already bought my airplane tickets. But that's kind of all that's going on, slowly getting through some books. Definitely plan on finishing reading the In the Mountain Cried, I think it's called. It's sitting downstairs. And Skyjacker and a couple of these other ones behind me that I haven't gotten through. But that's all. Yeah.
Nicole Legg, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And one more time, I would like to thank Nicole Legg for appearing on Black Box Online Radio's Cooper Friday. And I really do appreciate the guests taking time for this program and also to just share what they genuinely think about the D.B. Cooper mystery. And right now, I would like to discuss the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard. Welcome to the Cooper Profile segment. It's a way that I conclude the episodes of Cooper Friday that I've started earlier this year. The Skyjacker was really an attempt to make a groundbreaking effort to create psychological profiles for skyjackers, because this was something that was a relatively new form of psychological territory in the mid-20th century. Some of the things that I've been going through in the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard pick up from last week when he talks about people are dealing with some very intense memories from the past, and they can use them to affect their personality and their life choices in the present. And he talks a lot about retrojection, but in the segments that I just read, it's more about invisible sabotage. A lot of people believe that D.B. Cooper was an underperformer. If you were to just Google D.B. Cooper psychological profile, you would probably find somebody saying that, well, he was perhaps doing okay in his life for a while, then things started to go downhill. But almost nobody says that D.B. Cooper was an absolute mega millionaire and so on. Some people might. I take it back. But a lot of people have this belief that D.B. Cooper was an underperformer in life. And the chapter that I was just going through in The Skyjacker really wants to talk about how. How and why would somebody even become an underperformer in the first place? One thing could be that they are sabotaging their lives in an invisible way. Why would they do this and how would they do this? Maybe they have a certain type of animosity toward their parents. And this could be done in a way where one parent becomes idealized and one parent becomes rejected. And then someone is going to try and recreate and rebuild themselves in the idealized version and are going to completely condemn the rejected version. Like in many of these Cooper profile segments, I've talked about how the psychological profiling of skyjacking says that most of the people that were interviewed and examined and explored for this book had an alcoholic father and a religious zealot mother. And let's just say that somebody is going to have the pathway in life to go toward the alcoholic and abusive father or the strict, controlling religious zealot mother. Now, they're going to tell themselves, I'm not like one of my parents. I'm going to actually try and do things in the opposite way. But what Dr. David G. Hubbard is very keen to note is that they're not going to be successful with that. This is the concept of how something can bury itself within somebody's personality, or it's affecting their personality in an unknown and unseen way, and thus they're actually recreating the destructive behaviors of both their parents. Invisible sabotage. That's the term that's used in the book. And when they're doing this, they are almost trying to get away from the types of destructive behaviors that they experienced in the past, but they're not aware that they're doing the same mistakes over and over again. And also, these things are driving them to underperform in life, to earn less money, to have less success, to not achieve the things that they're setting out to achieve. Because let's say if they have the alcoholic father who's abusive and the overly strict, zealous, and controlling mother, maybe they do have a drinking problem that slowed them down for a portion of their lives. Maybe they were too strict when they should have been more easygoing. Maybe they have genuine personality issues that are affecting their life choices and their relationships and their workplace dynamics. How about that one? I began the episode talking to you so much about Boeing and everything, about, what if Cooper worked at Boeing? What if he was a jerk at Boeing and then nobody liked him and then he got fired and then he had the grudge? Now, something like that all goes back to the parents. And there's some very technical things that Dr. David G. Hubbard explores with this, and we're talking about extremely technical, and I really want to read up more on this in the future because I am somebody who is still learning. We're even talking about how certain things like the way that the ear processes sound could be affecting someone's personality and so on. But a lot of people want things. They want money. They want a nice house and they want to have nice cars and so on. But sometimes they aren't making decisions that can actually generate the results that they claim. And you could be like, well, that's just sometimes laziness. Not everyone really strives as hard as they could, or maybe they don't genuinely care about that as much as they do, or maybe they actually want that stuff, but they don't want to strive for growth in a way that could generate those types of results. And I would just say yes to all of that. Yes, 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 yes. That is what they're doing. Why are they doing that? All the reasons that I just listed. That their personality has been affected by the actions and behaviors of their parents in a way that is unknown to them, where they are not striving for what they consciously want. And there can be other things, though, that are genuine forms of intentional sabotage. Everything that I've been saying is invisible sabotage. Sometimes people can intentionally sabotage things if they are recalling traumatic memories at a time when their emotional defenses are down. This is all in the same chapter. This is on the same pages. Let's say, for example, sometimes people are very consciously aware of emotionally traumatic experiences in the past. Last week on Cooper Friday, I was talking to you about the girl who was regularly beaten by her grandmother, and, there are different ways that people can internalize that. Well, some people are going to think about it all the time. They might be highly neurotic. And when they think about it all the time, they're going to blame the person who was doing it to them. Well, maybe she did it because she was angry. If they're low in neuroticism, they're going to think about it in the sense of, oh, she said that I am a bad person because I am a bad person. But no matter what, the person who thinks about like these troublesome and problematic experiences regularly might think about them every day. But what happens to the person who doesn't think about the stuff regularly? A lot of people listening to this program, let's not kid ourselves, have emotional trauma, emotional damage, or you've been through it at some point in your life. And you've probably known somebody who really didn't express a lot of emotional issues. Did you ever know somebody like that who was closed off, and if they were thinking about some type of emotional damage, you would have no idea? When does it come out? When they are challenged, when their emotional defenses are going down, when there is some type of major confrontation. Let's use the example of the 14-year-old girl that was beaten by her grandmother. Okay, she might not even think about that at all for 15 years or something like that. So 14, let's say 15 years, she's 29 years old, and then if her grandmother is still alive and she gets into some type of argument with her grandmother about something, then it's all going to come back. And it's all going to come back, and then she's going to be like, you did this to me, you hurt me in this way. And then all of these things that are just pouring out when the emotional defenses are down. It's not invisible, it's not unseen, it's not something that is unconscious, or it's not something that is just some type of buried emotional trauma. Now, everything is on the surface, and this person is directly recalling what they are saying, and they're just throwing it all out there. And I think that that's a very honest way of putting it. Because, I mean, a lot of this does seem to relate to neuroticism. And I've told you many times, I think that Cooper was rather low in neuroticism. I said it relates a lot to neuroticism because it seems like that is the variable that is pushing people toward internalizing the blame on themselves or versus exporting the blame onto other people. If they're high in neuroticism, they're going to push the blame onto other people. Low in neuroticism, they're going to blame themselves. Cooper might be low in neuroticism, so he just would be taking in some type of very intense emotional abuse in his lifetime, most likely at the hands of his parents, but as we see, it could be a grandparent. Then he is going to just use this as ways to not truly succeed in life. Maybe he is very desperate for money. I mean, another thing that I'm very 50-50 on, and I don't like saying it, but it's true, is that was Cooper married? Was Cooper ever married? I mean, based on his age, I would expect that he was married at some point, but that is just a guess. I mean, I'm absolutely 50-50 on whether Cooper was married at some time during the hijacking. I mean, 50-50 on him being married during the hijacking at some point in his life, like divorced. I think that that is much more probable. So at some point in life, I think Cooper does get married. All right, so we've covered that one. But if he were actually in some type of financial trouble, what's this all coming back to? Being low in neuroticism, sabotaging his relationships unintentionally, sabotaging his work life unintentionally. Then, once he is challenged, and he actually is faced with something life-altering, which he can't just slack his way out of, which he can't just, shuffle his way out of, he has this type of emotional shift when everything just goes away and he's like, all of these bad things happen to me in my life. I need to do something to make things right, to settle the score, to make myself whole. I need to get revenge on some type of aspect of society. Cooper said it in his own words. He had a grudge. And everybody always zones in on that statement. And for a while I was thinking that they were making a mountain out of a molehill. Not now. No, I think Cooper genuinely had a grudge. And the reason why he was doing all of that stuff was because the emotional defenses went down. Something pressured him into committing the skyjacking. And it doesn't have to be like pressure in the sense that, oh my goodness, if I don't do this, my wife will leave me. Or it doesn't have to be pressure like someone has a gun to my head and they're saying, if you don't commit the skyjacking, we'll kill your whole family. Not that type of pressure, no. We're talking about putting pressure on the ego, the self-image, and again, on emotional states of being. That's what I think is all of this is leading to. So again, these are just some things that I've pulled out from the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard, and that's often how I conclude these Cooper Friday segments. One more time, I would like to thank Nicole Legg for appearing on the program, and again, I would love to know any feedback that you guys have about the Cooper Friday show, as well as the other segments here on Black Box Online Radio, Zodiac Monday, Ripper Wednesday, and Cooper Friday, where I talk to you guys mostly about unsolved mysteries. And this Tuesday on Black Box Online Radio, there will be a very brief return to the segment that I did on Jean-Benet Ramsey. And for a while I was doing some regular episodes about Jean-Benet, but I'm going to do two more because there are two episodes that I really had wanted to do and explore. And then I'm hoping to launch a Black Dahlia segment for Black Box Online Radio, and that will be done on Tuesdays. And the Thursday show is going to be a revolving panel of bonus episodes. So lots of true crime content to explore here on Black Box Online Radio. I also release shorts Monday through Friday here on BBO War, mostly talking about serial killers, true crime news, but anything under the sun or in the darkness is fair game. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. That's all for me now. I will see you on Monday. Until next time.